What is the best fictional post-apocalyptic world? Some might say the Australian gearhead world of Mad Max, or perhaps the post-nuclear war 1950s aesthetic of the Fallout universe. If you're particularly a man or woman of culture, you might say something more niche, like the sun-scorched land of the Book of Eli. Love that movie. And if you're my girlfriend, you might point out that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is technically a post-apocalyptic world. But without a doubt, my absolute favorite depiction of a world after a civilization-ending disaster, and an incredibly underrated one in my opinion, is the planet Earth as depicted in the 1999 real-time strategy video game Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun.
Welcome back, Commander.
The game takes place in the year 2030, a far-flung future, at least for all of us gamers in 1999 when the game was released, after a mysterious alien meteor crash-landed in the Tiber River in Italy in 1995. The planet was changed forever. Inside was an unknown crystalline plant that soon became known as Tiberium. It grew relatively quickly, spreading across the entire globe, only slowed by the extreme cold of the polar regions. At first, Tiberium was seen as a godsend. The alien substance would bury itself in the ground and leach valuable minerals, ores, and nutrients from the soil and deposit them into easily harvestable green crystals on the surface. Gone were the days of building expensive mines and sending hundreds of workers underground. This miracle crystal did all the work for humanity. And it was almost too good to be true. Probably because it was. A myriad of problems were created by Tiberium, even in the initial decade when it was first discovered. Firstly, it greatly shifted the balance of power, as whoever could harvest and accumulate the most Tiberium became the de facto most powerful faction in the world order. As Western nations slowly acclimated to Tiberium's effects on the global economy, there was one faction that seemed primed and ready beforehand to immediately hit the ground running and take advantage of Tiberium. The Brotherhood of Nod, an Abrahamic religious order, a multinational corporation, and a quasi-nation-state made up of disaffected groups from all over the Third World. They claim to have been around since the Bronze Age, but rose to power in the late 20th century. Within a few years, using their already considerable knowledge of the alien crystal, they managed to gain control of almost half the world's known supply of Tiberium. Around this time, the Brotherhood also began launching terrorist attacks on Western nations, and moving to take military control of key areas in Eastern Europe and Africa. Alarmed by these sudden acts of aggression and unwilling to let an unknown quantity like the Brotherhood have so much control of the world's new economy, Western nations called upon the military arm of the United Nations, the Global Defense Initiative, or more simply, GDI.
We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
This was the start of the First Tiberium War, depicted in the first game in the series, Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn. And hey, it was just remastered for modern computers and is now on Steam, so feel free to check it out if the world of Tiberium intrigues you. Anyway, the war lasted for about 3 years, and ended with a GDI victory over Nod, including the destruction of their temple in Sarajevo, and the alleged killing of their enigmatic leader, known only as Kane. With the Brotherhood destroyed, scattered, and leaderless, it seemed for the moment that world order had been restored. But even during the events of the first game, rumors and speculation can be heard that Tiberium may be far more dangerous than initially thought. In between missions, cutscenes depict Tiberium taking over small towns, mutating the plant life into yet more Tiberium, and creating the so-called blossom trees that spread Tiberium spores into the air. News reports give troubling indications that more and more people are getting sick from Tiberium poisoning, even as the war between GDI and Nod takes up most of the news cycle. Even one of your subordinates, normally there to give you updates from the battlefield as a matter of course, ends up having his last appearance looking quite sickly. Given that we never see him again for the rest of the campaign, it can be assumed that he died, either in battle, or perhaps more likely, of Tiberium poisoning. But again, all of this is only there if you're looking for it. Tiberium is a quiet world ender, a slow apocalypse. And as the world of Tiberian Sun will show us, humanity didn't realize what kind of vampire they'd invited into their homes until it was too late. 30 years have passed, and Earth doesn't even look like Earth anymore. you'd be forgiven for thinking the game takes place on an alien planet. The truth is, before much longer, it might as well be. Tiberium has accelerated in its spread and evolution. It now mutates all biological life it comes into contact with, flora and fauna. What life it doesn't immediately kill becomes an unholy reflection of something more at home on another planet. Dogs become Tiberian fiends, massive crystalline hounds that hide in the fields of Tiberium. Sea life become Tiberian floaters, amphibious dealers of electric death. Humans, if you're not fortunate enough to die immediately, devolve into Tiberium visceroids, hostile to anything that moves. A select few retain their humanity, even as they're slowly dying and losing more of their bodies to Tiberium. These mutants are known as the Forgotten, cast off by the rest of humanity that knows no cure for the Tiberium affliction. Plant life hasn't fared much better. What little vegetation is left is more likely than not to be a blossom tree, co-opted into furthering the spread of Tiberium. The Tiberium spores grow in sludges on land and in the sea, and overtake vast cliffs and wide valleys in a cacophony of green and blue Tiberian crystals. Go a little further into the untamed wilderness of this alien world, and you'll find Tiberian vein holes, a new strain of Tiberium that grows from a central pit that swallows anything that comes near, and attacks any intruder that treads upon its tendrils, if it's heavy enough to trigger a response, that is. Oh, and if you try to attack it, it'll spew Tiberium toxin clouds in self-defense that mutate and kill anything foolish enough to get too close. And even if none of that kills you, you still have to contend with ion storms, a new weather phenomenon brought about by the arrival of Tiberium, featuring lightning strikes and electromagnetic disturbances that ground all aircraft and render radar offline. In short, this is the scariest scenario imaginable on a human level. Your home is no longer your home. It's been mutated into an alien landscape designed to be fundamentally incompatible with human life. The very air you breathe is becoming more and more hostile to continued human existence. It's almost as if Tiberium was sent to Earth to kill off the previous inhabitants, and prepare the planet for its new tenants. But if this was all that the post-apocalypse of Tiberium had to offer, it honestly wouldn't be that far removed from other depictions of the end of the world in media. No. What sets Tiberian Sun apart is what remains of humanity in this scenario. In most fiction, humanity is reduced to roving bands of raiders, marauders, and survivors. Humans make do with machetes, old guns with limited ammunition, and other such scrapped-together weapons of convenience. Not here. Because the sick irony of this world is, the very thing that's killing civilization is also the thing that allows the survivors to fight on with pre-apocalypse military hardware. That's right, Tiberium may be the engineer of our destruction, but it's also still doing what it was designed to do since it landed in 1995 in the Tiber River, leaching precious metals, ores, and nutrients from the soil. So, unlike most other post-apocalyptic scenarios, the survivors of humanity get to fight with mechanized walkers, jump jet troopers, sonic tanks, cyborg commandos, lasers, and optic camouflage. This world is no Mad Max. The planet may be sucking down its last breaths, but the remaining factions fight with the same military budgets they've always had. Maybe more, now that there are no nations left to compete for resources with. Tiberium is burning our planet to fuel its own mysterious purposes. But it's also the fuel that allows humanity to fight over the ash heap. And that, to me, is just an insanely cool and unique premise for a post-apocalyptic world. As the Second Tiberium War begins, the Global Defense Initiative is all that remains of the nations it used to represent. They're desperately trying to find a way to reverse the spread of Tiberium and take our planet back, while also protecting what's left of civilization. But the Brotherhood of Nod has also survived. With no Western nations to oppose them, the scattered factions of Nod knit themselves back together with fanaticism and violence. Led by their now returned leader Kane, seemingly back from the dead and oddly with no signs of aging, Nod's fanatics have a far different vision for humanity's future. Tiberium is not a curse, but a blessing foreseen by Cain himself. Rather than try to pull humanity back from the edge, the Brotherhood intends to push us careening off the cliff. Tiberium must transform the Earth for humanity to evolve as a species. Or so the followers of Cain believe. And it's into this world that we are dropped as the player and asked to fight. A world on the brink of extinction. A world almost devoid of hope. But not quite yet. Even as a kid, I found this world fascinating and endlessly captivating. I imagine most people wouldn't, and my dad certainly doesn't. He's always been more of a Command and Conquer Generals enjoyer. And for good reason, it's the best game in the series, gameplay-wise. Love you, Dad. But I contend that no game has a richer atmosphere and a more unique take on a post-apocalyptic world than Tiberian Sun. You get to be the hero in this world, assuming you play as GDI, but you're a hero in a very bleak world. And I think that's what captivated me as a kid, playing this game over and over and over. Too often in fiction, bleak worlds necessarily mean gray morality, equally despicable factions on both sides, and an endless cycle of violence. But Tiberian Sun provides a take on bleak worlds that I don't often see. That being, the bleaker the world, the greater opportunity for heroism. In a world as depressing as this, the mere act of fighting back at all is the highest virtue. And it's not even the story necessarily that provides this feeling, although it definitely is a big part of it. It's the drab, earthy browns and alien greens and blues of its art style, the blocky military tan of GDI and the concrete gray and blood red of Nod, the voice lines of the units that speak of duty and fervor amidst overwhelming odds. And of course, no discussion about the vibe and atmosphere of Tiberian Sun would be complete without talking about the soundtrack. Composed in part by legend of the series Frank Klepacki and primarily by Jared Mendelsohn, the soundtrack of Tiberian Sun is equal parts Aliens, Terminator, and 90s industrial techno grunge. All I have to do is hear iconic tracks like Scouting or Ferrotech, and I'm immediately transported back to childhood me, piloting the Kodiak into battle to command mech walkers and orca fighters that take back Earth from the fanatics of the Brotherhood of Nod. Look, if it's not obvious by now, Tiberian Sun means a lot to me, and for a lot of reasons. It was one of the first video games I ever played, sparking a lifelong love of the hobby. It was a game I played a lot with my dad and my older brother. It was my first exposure to James Earl Jones, who played General James Solomon. And the technology of the world was one of the three major influences that made me want to become an engineer. For the record, the other two were Back to the Future and a key conversation with my dad. But the element I think Tiberian Sun doesn't get enough credit for is its unique vision of a post-apocalyptic world. This sort of thing would kind of get removed in future games in the series, particularly Command & Conquer 3, where the world doesn't seem nearly as much on the edge of extinction. And it's ironic that even further games in its own series don't do this concept as well as Tiberian Sun does. In fact, in my opinion, no other piece of fiction does it better. And I hope future creative endeavors in this genre will take cues from its unique world building and setting. And above all, I hope that writers remember that a bleak world doesn't have to mean a bleak destiny for the story. Contrast often makes for the greatest emotional catharsis in a story. Show me a world where almost all hope is lost, and I'll show you the greatest acts of daring, strategy, and heroism required to pull us all from the brink. And the crazy thing is, this game accomplished all this mostly by atmosphere, vibe, and setting. Those are the kinds of fictional worlds I love. And for me, that love all started with a long-forgotten real-time strategy game with an awesome setting and world in 1999 called Command & Conquer: Tiberian Sun.
Where the hell are those reinforcements?
Reinforcements have arrived.
It's not, sir. They came out of nowhere. We have to get back to the base and rebuild the refinery and barracks before